So we started doing the food summits at Oneida in 2012, partnered with Chef Metoxen and Chun Hinkwa and Jonesy and Kyle and Don, a whole bunch of crew at Chun Hinkwa back in the day, and hosted that first one at Oneida of a small regional producer summit. That grew and transformed into the Food Sovereignty Summit, which was a national event. And then first time we hosted Great Lakes Intertribal Food Summit was 2015, again at Oneida, and before we moved it to Gun Lake for a couple of years, Red Lake, Meskwaki, and now we're at Pokagon. And each community has their own unique feel and resources and history. So every place that it's at is brings that unique flavor to it. But really the idea behind doing these food summits, it's decolonizing the conference format. We're not in a convention center hearing PowerPoint presentations all day, and we'll have some PowerPoints mixed in here and there, but it's much more about getting back onto the land and bringing our youth. We've hosted a concurrent youth summit for the past 4 years, and connecting our youth with the elders and with that traditional knowledge, focusing on seed to table, where we have a track on seed saving, but we also have extensive foraging and focusing on indigenous land management, and looking at traditional foods at the same time as in the modern context. How do we bring in? And we had a workshop on from planting sticks to tractors, and looking at Oneida of some of the work that's going on there of bringing people together, community members together, doing no-till organic approaches, and so really combining that traditional and the modern. How do we feed our communities again? That's what it's really all about, and getting to that point where we can be bringing the foods back.
Tell us a little bit about some of the sponsors, the groups that have come together for this conference in the last couple of years.
So this year's event at Pokagon is hosted by the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians, Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, and the Intertribal Agriculture Council. And
who are they?
Yeah, so the Intertribal Agriculture Council was formed in 1987, and we're composed of all federally recognized tribes. We've got our member tribes elect our board of directors, but we're a national organization that is helping to promote Indian agriculture across the nation. Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance is a newer organization, incorporated 2013-14, and really helping to bring together grassroots individuals and groups, giving a voice to those grassroots. Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance has started a Culinary Mentorship program. So that's where at this event we've got 60 chefs, over 60 Native chefs that applied to be a part of the mentorship program, and a lot of them actually have funded their own travel to get here and have been able to come together and serve all the food. Pokagon, for the Pokagon Band, our host this year, has just leveraged a bunch of staff resources and financial support and opening up their lands to, we've got 700 people that have registered for this event, and so I do want to thank especially Pokagon for all of their help and graciousness in making this event happen.
Tell us a little bit about the diversity of who's in the kitchen. What kind of chefs, where are they coming from?
Well, the cool thing with the Culinary Mentorship program is we had an option for people to apply as both mentors and mentees, or both. So we got Sean Sherman, the sous chef, Loretta Odin, Arlie Dockstader, Claudia Serrato couldn't make it, but was one of them. And just a fantastic lineup of established chefs. But then we've got younger chefs and people who are just getting into it. And so to be able to connect them with those experienced chefs is one of the cool things about it. And just the collective knowledge that's there is it's just amazing.
What parts of the country are represented here in the chefing?
So we've got folks all the way from northeast Canada to the southwest, of the United States, and we've got just incredible representation, and that's part of the idea of an Intertribal Food Summit. We focus, this is the Great Lakes Intertribal Food Summit, so we focus on the Great Lakes region, but the intertribal aspect of it brings together people from across the country, brings together flavors and ingredients, stories and perspectives, and I think that's part of what makes the event so unique is that intertribal aspect.
That's the question. 200 years ago, 700 people, same number of people who registered for this conference, came to here for some other reason, treaty rights, gathering resources, sapping, whatever it be. What's the difference and what's the similarities in what's going on here today?
Well, I think, first thing, the similarity, you have 700 people coming together, people have to eat, people need water to drink, and, so that's, I think, to me, why food is so important, that it's one of, you don't survive if you don't have food. And back in the day, people would have brought or foraged or hunted, fished for all of that food that would have been feeding people. Same thing today, but we're doing it in a little bit different context of, they got most people, I think everybody came here in a motor vehicle, and so it's a little bit easier to transport items today, but I think it's that similarity of you gotta feed people. That's pretty foundational aspect of a food summit.
You wouldn't be able to run over to Walmart.
No, back in the day you couldn't run to Walmart. We've had some grocery store runs. We've had some. We've reordered through Cisco, partnering with the casino, which is it's interesting if we're still connected into that national food system, but we have a huge portion of the foods that are served here come from tribal producers and our traditional foods, and I think it's something to think about if we didn't have that of where would we be getting stuff from, and we're getting a lot from the woods here. But again, it's where you got the traditional, but we do live in a modern time, and so we're bringing some of the modern stuff in. But maybe for one of them in the future, we'll just go all off the grid in the woods, in the fields.
Tell us a little bit about what we're eating here. What do you see when you're saying there's a comparison? Yeah, you got to run to town for a few things now. But tell us a little bit about some of the things that are on the menu here.
So, our menu it's Great Lakes focused in terms of the ingredients. So we've got a lot of wild rice. We've gone through about almost 600 pounds of corn, about 30 gallons of maple syrup. But and then we got buffalo. We butchered a buffalo on the first day, and elk as well. We got whitefish, lake trout, hickory nuts, so just a whole variety and array of indigenous foods.
Behind you got some kettles going, copper kettles that would have been hammered out, treaty kettles over to the left. What is it about the kind of diet that's occurring here, health-wise, that we're trying to get at for our community? It seems to me that a lot of people are talking about healthiness in our community. What does this event bring to that table?
From a health perspective, we've heard stories from previous events of we've had participants who are diabetic, and at the beginning of the event they've had a tough time with their sugar levels and maintaining it, but just over the course of 3 or 4 or 5 days they have a noticeable improvement in how they feel in their physical health. And so for this year's event, we actually partnered with Pokagon Health Department and voluntary basis of having people go and get their blood drawn and checking their sugar levels at the beginning of the event, and then we're going to check them again at the end of the event, and just to quantify of what type of an impact eating more healthy indigenous foods with a low glycemic index, what kind of an impact that has on people.
Over the course of the last 4 years, going to Red Lake, going to Meskwaki, Oneida, we're over here. Tell us a little bit about some of the workshops that have occurred here. I've observed, for example, people making traditional elements. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing by some of the presenters, traditional tools.
Yeah, we've been tied the traditional tools in, and personally, I think it's important to have a knowledge and understanding of the traditional ways of growing and harvesting, because it helps to strengthen your connection and your relationship to the foods. Whether that's seeds, whether that is whether that's foraging, whether it's raising animals, and butchering the buffalo, that it gives you more of a sense of an understanding of what our ancestors, how our ancestors lived. And I think that's part of why that tradition is important. And I think the tradition is important, especially for our youth, that it helps to build excitement and interest in the foods. So that's a big reason why we've put a focus on bringing that traditional technology and tools into it. But then we also have some of the modern approaches. So we had a lot of upper level USDA staff here talking about 2018 Farm Bill and about how those programs for the new programs, the updates to programs, but the long-standing existing programs, how can they help to support help to support this work, help to support our communities by bringing the resources and the both from a financial and a technical standpoint to help to do this on a regular basis, to help to bring back our food systems and expand our tribal food economies. And that really is part of the contribution that the Intertribal Agriculture Council brings, is our relationship and our understanding of those USDA programs. And really, for moving forward from here, how can those programs help to support the food and ag work in our communities, and how do we ultimately support expanded production to help to feed our people?
Thinking about USDA and traditionalism, take us through a scenario of what someone would see here, beginning with the arrival of the buffalo that was going to end up at the table. Take us from the beginning to end. What would they see?
So the buffalo, we did the harvest out in the field, and we had invited the Pokagon veterans to come and to help with that. But that was a small and a closed event, just for the respect on the animal. We didn't want a lot of people there. So that happened on Wednesday morning, and then the buffalo arrived around lunchtime, and we spent the afternoon. We had a group of people led by Arlo and Lisa Ironcloud from Pine Ridge that regularly harvest buffalo. They led a workshop. We had probably, I'd say, at least 30 people helping and really learning where different cuts of meat come from on the animal, and again of helping to really have a better understanding of the food and the sacrifice that the animal made to feed people, and doing it in a respectful way, and that's helped to feed several hundred people over the past few days.
Where does USDA come into that preparation of the buffalo?
Well, the Pokagon Band has a food inspector, a health inspector that has been on site and has checking on food safety, and we live in a modern world, and there's lots of cases of foodborne illnesses, and that's part of why we have food safety codes. We had University of Arkansas here talking about the Model Tribal Food Code project, and when we look at how do we feed our people, how do we expand our tribal food economies, there's a component of infrastructure and regulation that is inherently going to be there. And so the more that we can educate people on safe food handling practices, that's part of helping to expand those economies of getting more of our locally tribally produced foods onto people's plates, is making sure that it's safe and healthy. And the reality is that we do have laws and policies that need to be followed, and how can we follow them and address them in a way that is not a barrier for our producers to be selling to the school or to the commodity food distribution program or to the elder programs, but that we have the support in place to be able to make it happen. That's historically, I think, one of the barriers why we don't have more of our traditional local foods in the programs are the policies and all the red tape or white tape that's been put in place and prohibiting it from happening. Well, it doesn't take a whole lot to have a food safety plan, a farm food safety plan in place, or to have I guess there's a little bit more when you're looking at a livestock processing facility, but we've got examples, Quapaw down in Oklahoma that's done it, and we got a lot of folks hunt deer and don't have we don't have too many problems with people getting sick off of that. But if you're going to get into the schools, there's going to be a little bit more of a layer of regulation that's in place, but being able to understand what those are, and a lot of it's not all that complicated, and that's part of moving forward, is just helping to put more of that support in place to be able to get those locally produced foods into the programs.
We got a lot of activity going around here today. Take a look if you want to, but real quickly, describe to me what you see going on here. Give me a walk out of 4 or 5 subjects here and in the area that people would be looking at. So, what's going on behind us?
Well, we got some soups going back there. I think we got making some hominy corn. I know that we got Vicki Cornelius from Oneida here, and one of the stories that I'll always remember is one of the events we were hosting at Gun Lake, and Vicki was there and said, "I've been cooking corn my whole life," and it was her first time cooking on a wood fire outside and washing it, in a traditional way. And again, it's reconnecting with how our ancestors had made it, and so that's part of seeing the copper kettles and the wood fires, and there's that fire is going to act a little bit differently than putting something on a gas range, and so it affects in some cases it affects the flavor, how that food cooks, and it's helping to deepen the relationship with those foods.
Okay. So when I look behind you here, I see people utilizing things, butaga. You got a workshop on butaga?
Yeah, we were making. We've had a workshop on making the wood corn mortars using yellow birch. Actually, the birch tree was harvested from the site here, and another example of combining the traditional and the modern, of using some chainsaws and an air compressor to help to speed along the process. Because if we did it just the purely traditional way, we'd be lucky to get through one of them through the whole event. But maybe next year we can do a traditional one and using some modern approaches as well, and give people a sense of to burn out that whole log. It's gonna take you a couple of days.
John Greendeer is down at that end of the camp doing hides. Tell us what that's about.
Yeah, so we got John Greendeer doing brain tanned deer, and then he's also doing the elk. And I think you look at the brain tanning process compared to most of the leather products that you see in the store today, that all of the chemicals and heavy metals that are used in commercial tanning process is really toxic. And to be able to see how to do it in the traditional way, that brain tanned leather, it's got a smell, it's got a texture, it's got a feel that is totally unique compared to a commercial product. And so to be expanding and giving people an opportunity to see how that's done is it's one of the cool activities, one of the new ones that we've added for this year's event.
Saw a lot of people yesterday, and today I think head off into the woods. What are they doing out in the woods here, following people around?
Well, the Rogers Lake site here of Pokagon's got is just a beautiful, it's beautiful forest. We got huge mature tree stands here, and just a whole diversity of plant communities. We're doing this in late April, and it's a nice time to do it because you got a lot of the spring ephemerals that are popping up. We got ramps and trout lilies, and tapping the yellow birch trees, harvesting some elm bark, and just a whole assortment of foraging opportunities here. And a lot of the food that's been foraged has gone into feeding people for the event.
I've heard several people talk about almost a revival of tradition, culture. You've talked a lot about trade routes. Tell us where trade routes connected to this whole event.
Well, we've got food that that's really coming from across Turtle Island for this event, and looking back at if we had several hundred people coming together 300 years ago, we
That's not your son. Wait until someone hollers out "Dad" and you start turning around and looking. So trade routes.
So looking at trade routes and looking at if we had several hundred people coming together, 300 or 400 years ago, people would have been bringing all of their foods, whether it be canoe or carrying it, would have had to feed people. And we had extensive trade routes crossing Turtle Island historically, and I think one of the strategies of expanding our tribal food economies is helping to strengthen and reconnect and bring back those trade routes, because for example, we've got several community members from Walpole Island here. Walpole Island was a historic trading center. Today, Walpole Island is one of the main centers where sweetgrass comes from. I know that they're looking at bringing corn back, of growing their own corn again, and right there, those are two of the resources that Walpole has. We've got fish that is coming up from Lake Superior whitefish, lake trout, and right there, that was one of the big trade items, dried fish back in the day. And one of the cool things with the event here is smoking fish over a wood fire over beams, and that's historically. Drying your foods was one of the main ways of preserving it, and so featuring all of the different assortment of the different foods at this event. Part of how that helps to reconnect the trade routes is it's helping to bring back the taste and the flavors for the foods, and the more that people get the flavor and the taste for those foods, they want to get more of it. And so the demand increases, and ultimately that helps encourage more people to get back into growing, whether they're growing it themselves or whether we have people trading and growing out a larger portion and then being able to help to feed more people. That's part of reconnecting the trade routes and part of helping to expand our tribal food economies.
And it seemed like there were several layers there to what's going on with trade routes and food and products. We're talking about family, clan, tribe, excess revenues. I went to a business entrepreneurship class tomorrow. Tell us what that's about, trying to service.
Well, I know we got Little Traverse Bay Band here, and they brought a bunch of sugar down, and they sold out of it. And you look historically, 1865. The Michigan tribes were producing almost 450,000 pounds of sugar just in 1 year. And to see that sugar production coming back and to see the demand and the interest in that sugar production, that's part of reconnecting our trade routes. It's part of expanding our tribal food economies, and it highlights that there's interest. People want these foods, and that's an economic opportunity for community members, and that maple sugar, it's going to be a whole lot healthier than a refined cane sugar.
And if someone wants to get into the business of sugar, as an example, or rice, or some other product, we're talking about trying to provide stuff to the family table. to the institutions in the community and the business opportunity. So tell me that, give me that back, give me that concept of why we're gathering and how we get to the community, and then if we want to pursue a business opportunity, it may be there. And I got one other question.
So with sugar, the maple season is done, but the birches are running right now, so we've been able to tap some trees and and showing some of that process of how you make sugar, and how you make syrup, and some of it, it's kind of like planting a seed of giving people, some of the initial inspiration and knowledge. And hopefully they'll take it home and, tap some trees next year and do some sugar themselves. I know I've talked to a lot of people that are just doing a couple of trees in their backyard. And, as a starting point, at least it helps to build some familiarity. Maybe a few years down the line, they'll go from tapping a couple of trees to tapping a couple of dozen, or maybe even a couple of hundred. And that's what we need to have happen to expand production to be able to feed our communities.
Heard a lot of language in and around the community, different dialects from different parts of the country. Where does language play a role in this?
Well, I think language, it's part of that relationship and that understanding of foods, and I think the more that we have that understanding of the language, it helps to understand the food in a deeper way, and in a way that our ancestors historically did.
Is there anything else you want to add right at the moment?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay, we're good. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was thinking, I heard Dan touch on a lot of different things, but that are the impacts of this summit on different communities that it's hosted. Have you seen any on the ground? Actual, in reality, kind of improvements in communities or in tribes adopting any of these ideas that are taught here, or things like that?
I think part of the longer term impact of these type of gatherings, of these type of summits, is that it helps to the ultimate objective here is we want people to be inspired. We want people to take what they've learned here, to take what they've experienced here, and to bring it back to their community and to share that. Whether that is hosting a meal, whether that is starting a seed bank, and whether that's working with your school. That's what we want to see. And I think that in the past few years that there have been a lot of successes, and that a lot of people have taken it back. I can say right here at Pokagon, Gary Morrisaw, he's on council right now, and last year we brought the mobile farmers market van with Intertribal Ag Council into a community dinner, and Gary cooked all of the food for that dinner, and a lot of it was recipes that were inspired by chefs that that he had connected with at the summit. And that event drew about 125 community members, and I think it's an example of where the inspiration from these events has gone back to the community and has had an impact of Pokagon hosting the event this year.
Seeds. Tell me about what we see here going on with seeds in this event.
So, seeds, I think, are in a lot of ways a metaphor for our larger efforts to promote tribal food and agriculture. That the seed within that little seed is our stories, our connection to our ancestors that have really evolved over countless generations. And when we plant these seeds and water them and care for them, they grow and they ultimately help to feed us. And then they go back to, to the next generation of plants and feeding our communities. But one of the really exciting things with seeds, and Rowan White and the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network have been doing fantastic work of rematriating seeds, going and finding them. I know the Field Museum in Chicago recently had rematriated seeds back to Meskwaki, and all of these seeds and these historic seeds, these seeds have come from our ancestors by what has survived and what our ancestors liked. And over the course of so many generations, we've had an amazing diversity that has come out of what has been saved and continued to be grown. And I think the power of the seeds is that if you're growing seeds that your ancestors grew, you have a deeper relationship and respect for those seeds, and I think that most people are gonna take care of them a lot better. So that's part of the power of the seeds.
Want to say hi to your mom or anybody else?
I'll say hi to baby Louie. Where's baby Louie?
Good.